All right, the latest book that I finished here, U.S. Marines at the Battle for Sangin by Landon Longgrear. This is Landon's story of him and his unit fighting in Operation Enduring Freedom. So back in, I believe, 2011 is the story of this book when him and his unit went over to Afghanistan and fought some pretty severe battles over in Sangin, which at the time was the deadliest combat area in Afghanistan. And so it makes for a pretty wild story of what goes on over there with his unit. Obviously, this is a memoir of his story and how he grew up and what happens over there. And unfortunately, the deaths that his unit deals with, they end up dealing with a lot of them. And that's kind of the story of this book in a way, is how him and his unit were able to deal with that. But anyways, Landon is a kid, grew up in Texas, and always had a dream of joining the military and fighting with the Marines. And tells his story of growing his humble beginnings and eventually going off, joining the Marines, getting shipped overseas, fighting in combat over there. Talks a little bit about what happens after combat, but ultimately it's his story of his brotherhood that he joined. And I personally am a big fan of military memoirs. I've read so many of these, particularly ones of the recent battles since 2000, right? Since 9/11. All the Afghanistan, Iraq, Operation Enduring Freedom. I've read a lot of these books, and I think they all have something to deliver. And this one doesn't disappoint. It's got its own little tilt to it in the sense that, in particular, Landon is a very religious guy, and that comes out a lot in this book. And it's interesting to think about the dichotomy there of someone who is off fighting in combat, obviously killing people in the name of freedom, yet is a deeply religious person, and how he kind of squares those two things. And at the same time, the moral dilemmas that come from being a Christian engaged in warfare, and as well as with his brothers and sisters over there, and what happens, and he experiences some divine interventions and things like that. So it's the story of transformation of young, obviously this one in particular, of young men, and what happens when they go off and fight in combat in the name of the United States. But I think books like this are really important. I always try and read military memoirs. I think that there's something in it for everyone. Sadly, as someone who's read a lot of military books, including ones from the Vietnam era and World War II, these types of humans are a dying breed. It's a bit of a lost generation here in the United States, sadly, is that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about military members, people that are in service, people that are off fighting battles while we're over here doing what we're doing. I mean, at the time of this recording, there's a war going on in Iran right now, and it feels like all that's really talked about is the politics of it, and just sort of like criticisms of the presidents and why we're over there. And meanwhile, the people that are fighting in it, the people that are doing the work on behalf of these politicians, just sort of get lost. And they come back here, and it's just a very unforgiving life. And it's interesting, right? People like Landon, he grew up wanting to do that. Was his dream. His dream was to fight for the United States. And I think that there's something very honorable about that. And I think books like this are very important. It's a reminder to not take things for granted, and to be appreciative of what you have here. And to me, one of the easiest ways to practice gratitude is to read a book like this. It quickly zips you back to what affords us the life that we have, is reading military memoirs. I think that all of them, no matter who writes it, it's a lesson in leadership. You hear stories in this book. They tell tales of what goes on in their unit, and it just always feels like you can come away from a book like this with a lesson to apply to your own life, even in the business world. I mean, there's so many elements to that that you can apply in life and work. And so again, to me, books like this are just important for everyone to read. I do imagine that for the most part, it's going to be military buffs that read a book like this, although I do hope more people will. Admittedly, not the best one that I've read, certainly not the worst. It's a short book. This one isn't even 200 pages, so you can get through it pretty quickly. But it really just is about the importance of keeping books like this top of mind, keeping stories like this top of mind. I think that there are a lot of young kids, especially nowadays, that could benefit from the brotherhood of the military. And what that gives these guys, even though they go through struggles, and Landon talks about that, is that it's always hard for these guys to offload from the military. My best friend growing up was in the military. He's a retired Marine, and it's just not easy, right? The brotherhood these guys experience is you're with people 24 hours a day, doing everything with them, sleeping with them, eating with them, fighting with them. I mean, it's such a brotherhood that you can't experience in civilian life, and so. Again, I just think there's some lessons in here for everyone, even just personal life lessons. I have a quote here that I liked. I thought it was a great one. It says, "Sometimes you find yourself in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes in the middle of nowhere you find yourself." I think that is, these guys were obviously talking about it in the context of war, right? You're in the middle of Afghanistan and you kind of figure out who you are pretty quickly when bullets are flying past your head. What are you willing to do and sacrifice? But I think that applies to life too. Right, regular life, my life, anyone's life that's watching this is that sometimes it's in the middle of nowhere where you find out what you're all about, what you're willing to do, what you're willing to sacrifice. And again, books like this I just think are really cool and an important reminder. I think there's something in it for everybody. So that's the review for this one, U.S. Marines at the Battle for Sangin by Landon Longgrear. Hope you enjoyed the review, and questions, comments, throw them down below. Thanks.